Good morning, and welcome to St. Paul, United Church of Christ, Keokuk.
We have here a story of thirst, but not the kind of thirst we generally think of. It's a story of thirst in which someone is thirsting for a relationship that satisfies and not finding it. And it's appropriate that this should be around a well. John 4, verses 5 through 26. So now he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about the 6th hour. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" His disciples had gone into town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink? For Jews do not associate with Samaritans." Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." "Sir," the woman said, "you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where did you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did also his sons and his flocks and his herds?" Jesus answered, "Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks the water I give him will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give him will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life." The woman said to him, "Sir, give me of this water so that I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water." And he said to her, "Go, call your husband and come back." "I have no husband," she replied. Jesus said to her, "You are right when you say you have no husband. The fact is, you have had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. What you have just said is quite true." "Sir," the woman said, "I can see that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews claim that the place where we must worship is in Jerusalem." Jesus declared, "Believe me, woman, a time is coming when you will not worship the Father, neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. Yet a time is coming, and has now come, when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for they are the kind of worshipers the Father seeks. God is spirit, and his worshipers must worship in spirit and truth." The woman said, "I know that the Messiah, called Christ, is coming. When he comes, he will explain everything to us." Then Jesus declared, "I who speak to you am he." God add blessing to the reading of the word. Would the children come forward and the confirmation class as well to help me begin worship? The sermon. We have something we're going to talk about today, testing God. So I'd like you all to have a seat with me here. Now I know that everybody knows everybody in Keokuk. At least I think so. But I'd like our confirmation class to introduce themselves. They had their first meeting. And here's my microphone, right? Okay. I'd like the confirmation class to introduce themselves. They had their first meeting this Sunday. So just your name?
Briar Lindner.
Okay.
Gabe Miller.
They're going to be helping me a little bit in the children's sermon with this and that, small things, and maybe reading a line or two during worship service sometime to kind of get them used to the idea of being a part of worship in that sense. And, of course, Maggie is already a part in terms of her doing the Lord's Prayer once in a while, and that's good. Testing God. Can you say, Maggie, can you say testing, testing?
Testing, testing.
Okay, we have a tendency to feel that way with God, that we test God. Yeah. We want God to show us how powerful God is because we want to make sure, you know. So testing, testing.
Testing, testing.
I'm not really loud. Testing, testing.
Testing, testing.
That wasn't loud. That was just. Let's hear really loud.
Testing, testing.
That was just a little bit loud. Let's hear it a little bit louder than that.
Testing, testing.
Okay, now put your heart into it. Let's see if you got it.
Testing, testing.
Excellent. That was excellent. Yeah, that was great. Okay. We test God, but God has sacrificed a great deal for us. But it's our human weakness that we want to test God sometimes. And in doing so, then we need to be reminded. So y'all want to come over here. This is the part where I look at one of the windows. I'm going to be referring to this more and more. This is the Lamb of God, which would be Christ carrying the cross, which shows that the Lamb was sacrificed for us. We really don't need to test God much more than we already have because, well, actually we don't need to test God at all because God sent His only Son into the world, this Lamb, for our sakes, to be sacrificed on the cross. And that was a great and wonderful sacrifice. So Jesus was right there in front of us. We have witnesses. And even though God doesn't like to be tested even in the Old Testament, in the New Testament now in these times, we have witnesses that Jesus was right here walking among us and that Jesus had made that sacrifice for us so we could have life forever. And we don't need to test God. We don't need to test, right? Okay, now confirmation class, generally speaking, because I'm a kind of a grown-up kid, I like to hit this when I go by. So go ahead. Go ahead, sure. Not a half-hearted thing. Yeah, you gotta get into it. Just, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, that was great. Okay. Okay, good. All right. Okay, let's go back over here. Okay, have a seat. Okay, now we're going to pray, and we're going to thank God, and we're going to ask God to give us more faith and help our faith and doubts. So I'm going to put the microphone in front of each of you while we pray so we learn how to pray a little bit. So let's pray together. Lord, thank you.
Thank you.
For sending Jesus.
For sending Jesus.
Into our lives.
Into our lives.
So that. We could live. Forever. Help us. When we doubt. Amen. Very good. You guys are doing a wonderful job. Yeah. All right. Thank you. You can go back to your seats now. Sometimes we feel as though we must test God. We feel as though that God must do something for us that's very impressive, and then that will help us to believe. There's a little kind of an odd thing in that, though. And the odd thing is that if we're going to believe in God, really, God doesn't have to prove anything at all. If we're going to believe in God, we can just believe. Faith is enough without the sight of what's going to happen. We all know the story of doubting Thomas. He wouldn't believe that Christ was resurrected until he put his finger into the nail holes and his hand in the side and that sort of thing. Then he would believe. It's kind of the idea that we have of show me. I'm not going to mention any states in relation to this, but it's a very common saying in relation to our faith. Every once in a while, we just have the same tendency. We want God to provide a sign to indicate that God is indeed in control. And we want to do that in part because we feel as though we have to be in control, you see. We feel as though we have to have assurances. So basically, we want God to present to us a resume. And we want to see what accomplishments God has done. And we have a tendency to forget. We have a tendency to forget and asking for a sign about all the great things that God has already done. And so Israel, when they were released from Egypt, when a great king like Pharaoh was vanquished by God, was in the middle of the wilderness, and they were worried about whether or not they were going to have enough to eat. And they complained, and they quarreled. And whether or not they'd have enough to drink, and they complained, and they quarreled. They wanted God to show that they would have enough. And that was the reason behind Moses having to go and hit the rock, was because the people of Israel, again, wanted God to show that they were going to be taken care of. They wanted proof. They wanted God to respond. And what I often refer to in relation to that is that we have a kind of a vending machine God. You put in your quarter, God does a great and wondrous thing. Okay, I believe in you, God. You see? If you only show me you can do a great and wondrous thing, then I'm going to believe in you. The problem with that is that God does care for the people and loves the people and will care for them, but the people need to have the faith that God will take care of them. As a matter of fact, for God, taking care of them involved simply a day-to-day thing that God would do anyway. God did not want the people to focus on testing God. God wanted the people to focus on loving and following God, and then you didn't have to worry about the testing. If you loved and followed God, then God would provide for you. You see, we grow up and we think of things in exactly the wrong way for our faith. We think of things in terms of whether or not, something can prove that it can take care of us, or someone can prove that they can take care of us. In our faith, it's entirely different. We walk by faith and not by sight. We keep God firmly in our eyesight, and we follow God, and then all these things come in from the side somehow, and we don't know exactly how, but they do. They fill in. They sometimes give us just what we need for that day and just at the last moment, but they're there. We think God has to prove, when in fact we just need to focus on God and follow God, and the things will be provided that we need. That's hard to do. That's hard to do because we look to the side and so forth, and we think to ourselves, well, what could happen, what if, and that sort of thing. It's hard to just focus on God, follow God, and have the simple faith that God is going to take care of us, but it takes a lot of stress off of us, you see. But we're controllers, are we not? We want to control things. We want to control God. We want to say when God takes care of us. We want to say how God takes care of us. Now, it's hard to admit we're controllers. It's hard to admit, but nevertheless, here we are, and we want to control God. So, God, I'll tell you what, you do a great and wondrous thing, then I'll follow you. Otherwise, I'm going to have these doubts, I mean, you could do all the things you say, but you might not. And then I'll be sitting here all by myself, and I won't have taken care of myself. You see how that would sound to God? But God just says, follow me. It's the hardest thing in the world to do. It's nice because you can be like a child, you know. You don't have to worry about a whole lot of things. But it's the hardest thing in the world to do. We want to control things. We want to say when things happen. Israel tested God mightily. At one point said, God, we don't have anything to eat. God said, no problem. I did not take you out of Egypt to die in the wilderness, like you say. I'll provide you with manna. Manna came in like a frost in the morning, nice and white on the ground. People gathered it up. Those who tried to store it could not store it. They couldn't store it. They had to wait for the next day. Do you know why? Day by day. God was going to take care of them day by day. God was teaching them that God would take care of them day by day. The manna comes in the morning. Then, if you try to store it, it spoils. There's new manna the next day. Hard to think, you know, that we have to go day by day. But we had a good example of that here in this church. There were so many things that happened in relation to the roof project that happened at just the right time. So many resources that came in at just the right time, just the last minute. You see, and we have some windows that need fixing in the back too. And now we have a few more resources come in at just the last minute. Again, walking by faith and not by sight. Somehow it seems to work out. And that's what we really learn in Lent. But we're thirsty people, aren't we? We're thirsty because we're thirsty for control of our lives. We want to establish things ourselves. We want to establish the various things in our lives all by ourselves, and we seek security in all kinds of things. The woman at the well was thirsty because she sought security in relationships. And the relationships didn't work out, and didn't work out, and didn't work out. And Jesus said, you know, what about your husband? Well, I know that you've had a whole bunch of them, and I know that things didn't work out. What are you thirsty for? Are you trying to control everything yourself? Are you thirsty for the security of relationships, but you get in there and you control everything, so everything is supposed to work out and it doesn't? What are you thirsty for? Jesus said, I'm the answer to your thirst. I'm the answer to your thirst because I'll give you water that will never have you thirsting again. Will never have you in a relationship such that you're expecting more of it than it can possibly deliver, and you're desperately trying to satisfy your thirst by trying to find some kind of security somewhere. We do that, just like the woman at the well. Israel tested God, and we test God too with our tendency to want to control our own lives. We test God just like the woman at the well because we go off on our own and we do things off on our own, and we don't realize that we have a thirst for God. We have a kind of conditional faith too, in which God has to do something for us to have faith in all of that control. And as we exercise it, we fail, and we fail, and we fail, and we fail again. There's a reason behind that, and that is that we need to have God in our lives. We need to have that connection. We're incomplete without it. The woman at the well was incomplete without it. She didn't recognize it. She was trying to find security everywhere. She was trying desperately to control her life. You can see it in the conversation between her and Jesus. She even tried to control that, you see. But Jesus said, all you have to do is look at me and believe. That's all you have to do. You don't have to plan anything. You don't have to desperately look for all sorts of security everywhere. See, in our society today, we're like that woman. We're thirsty. And in Lent, it's a good time to be reminded of it. Our society is incredibly thirsty. Well, all you need to have is enough money and you'll be secure. All you need to have is enough military might and you'll be secure. All you need to have is the right leader and you'll be secure. All you need to have is what I want to control. I'm going to control it fine. We'll be secure. The fact is that we're never secure without God. There's no way that we can find anything in this world that's secure enough. There's no way. Now I notice that down in SCC they're building this Hall of Sciences, and I noticed that they're starting to put these footings, this foundation type stuff down. What happens if they just go ahead and build it? Well, what happens to it? It starts to lean this away and that away, settles into the ground, that sort of thing. Yeah, that's the way we are when we don't make that connection to God. We're thirsty for security, but there's no way that thirst is going to be fulfilled, but we just get more and more thirsty. I have that, for example, if I drink Mountain Dew. I'm more thirsty after drinking a can of Mountain Dew than I was before I drank the can of Mountain Dew. So what do? I drink another can of Mountain Dew. Yeah. Well, in the same manner, the more we try to exercise a conditional faith and trust in which we're in control, the more thirsty we become. And that's one of the fundamental lessons in Lent, is that we are not in control except that we believe. And that means that we surrender our will to God. Then things go well. But when sin came into the world, we decided that we knew better than God. We knew better than God, so we decided that we would just go ahead and take control ourselves. And we would force the issue. So now, instead of having the Israelite community, if you go back a little bit to what we had talked about before, instead of having them just follow God and camp where they're supposed to camp and wait for the water to come, this is what they say in the Bible. The whole Israelite community set out from the desert of sin, traveling from place to place as the Lord commanded. So they were following God through that. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. So they quarreled with Moses, "Give us water to drink." Moses replied, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you put the Lord to the test?" In other words, why are you bothering with this problem? God is going to provide water. But the people were thirsty for water there, and they grumbled against Moses. They said, "Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to make us and our children and livestock die of thirst?" Guilt. Lay a guilt trip on Moses, We're dying here. All right. Did God ever intend for the people to die? No, God just intended for the people to follow. But they're getting manipulative and they are getting controlling. Then Moses cried out to the Lord, "What am I to do with these people? They were almost ready to stone me." The Lord answered Moses, "Walk on ahead of the people, take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile, and go. I will stand there before you by the rock at Horeb, strike the rock, and the water will come out of it for the people to drink." So Moses did this in the sight of the elders of Israel, And he called the place Massa and Meribah because the Israelites quarreled and because they tested the Lord, saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?" Massa means testing and Meribah means quarreling. Yes, the people of Israel were thirsty, but their physical thirst was paralleled by another thirst, and that is that they did not have peace of mind. They did not have the following after God, the security that provided, because they did not have the kind of faith in which you follow God and you walk by faith and not by sight. They were disturbed. They were thirsty. They were thirsty for that kind of security. But there's only one place you can find it. There's only one well where it comes from. And they were looking into complaints. They were blaming. They were doing all kinds of things. But did they go to the well? Did they say, "God, we're thirsty"? Leave it at that? Knowing that God would provide for their needs? No, they complained. They blamed. They said, "Did God take us out here to die? Is that what happened?" And they put a guilt trip on Moses and also God, because they were thirsty for security. The security that would be provided if they just went to God, prayed, and said, "God, we're thirsty." That's all they needed to say, you see. So in Lent, we're aware that when our faith is conditional, we have no rest and we never will have any rest. When our faith is conditional on a sign, we don't have the ultimate full-hearted trust, and we will never, ever rest and never, ever have peace of mind, because there will always be things that are around us that take away our security, and we'll find our security wherever we can find it. Like at the foot of Mount Sinai, when they thought that Moses, in getting the law, wasn't going to come back down because he was probably dying on the mountain, they had the golden calf. We will never have peace of mind. We will never have the kind of peace that we can have and the kind of goodness that we can have unless we just follow God. Unless we just follow God. So the people of Israel then give us an understanding of a thirst which was shared by the Samaritan woman. The thirst is for that kind of security. That's why we want that sign. We want that sign because we want insurance. We want to be sure. And what we practice in Lent is a kind of understanding that, yes, sin did bring this kind of doubt into the world. It's as old as the Garden of Eden, where the serpent says, "Well, you can doubt God. No problem. You just eat of the tree. You're not going to die." You see? He seeded doubt into people. But what's a faith like where there's no doubt? We probably won't know it because God has to help us to in our doubts. But what's that kind of faith like? Well, that's where Abraham, for example, is called out of his land, and God calls him away from everything that's familiar, and he said, "Okay." So if we want the peace, if we want the security, we go to God. We go to God. First of all, we follow God all the time. And one of the things we understand in this journey to the cross is that is where we find the assistance and help that we need. Jesus, praying in the garden that the cup would be removed from him, finally said, "God, thy will be done." And if the Son of Man, if Jesus said that, we can too, and we can find an ocean of peace in that. Amen.
You have been listening to St. Paul United Church of Christ, 2030 Plank Road, Keokuk. Join our worship service at 10 a.m. with fellowship hour immediately following. Until next week, may God bless.